Hello, welcome to sqadia.com. Today our lecture topic is the brain and we are in the fourth section of this lecture topic, that is the forebrain. In this we'll be discussing what are the parts of the forebrain, that is what is diencephalon and what is telencephalon, what is cerebral hemisphere. We'll be briefly discussing the cross structure of the cerebellum. We'll be going through the thalamus and hypothalamus structures and their nuclei, and we'll be briefly going through the main sulci and gyri of the cerebral hemispheres. The cerebral hemispheres are developed from the telencephalon or from the largest part of the body. It may be divided into two parts, the diencephalon, which forms the central core, and there is a telencephalon which forms the cerebral hemisphere. Now this is a lateral view, a medial view of the cerebral hemisphere, as well as showing the diencephalon as well as the midbrain as well as the hindbrain. If you can appreciate over here, this is the cerebral hemisphere medial part. This is the central core which is forming the diencephalon, then connects with the midbrain, then eventually descending into pons and medulla oblongata, which is formed by the hindbrain. The diencephalon consists of the third ventricle and the structures that form its boundaries. Now, if you can appreciate over here, it's like kind of a box that there is two lateral surfaces. There is an anterior or superior surfaces, then there's an inferior surface, then there are certain structures lying ahead of it, and then there are certain structures lying behind it. So what are the structures which are formed by the inferior surface? When we view this diencephalon inferiorly, we see hypothalamus, then forms anterior to posterior lies the optic chiasma, which is the and then optic tract, laterally covered by tuber cinereum, fundibulum, and medullary bodies. If you view it from the superiorly, the superior surface of the diencephalon is concealed by the fornix, which is a thick bundle of fibers that originate in the hippocampus of the temporal lobe and arches posteriorly above the thalamus to join the medullary bodies. The actual superior wall of the diencephalon is formed with the roof of the third ventricle. The lateral surface of the diencephalon is bounded by the internal capsule of the white matter and consists of nerve fibers that connect the cerebral cortex with other parts of the brainstem and spinal cord. Medial surface. Since the diencephalon is divided into two symmetrical halves by slit-like third ventricle, it also has a medial surface. Imagine a box which has an inferior surface and superior surface, lateral surface, and medially there is a slit as well. So actually there are two boxes, and medially it's also divided by that slit. The medial surface of the diencephalon, that is the lateral wall of the third ventricle, is actually formed by in its superior part by medial surface with thalamus, in its inferior part by the hypothalamus. Now coming to the lateral surface, the thalamus is a large ovoid mass of gray matter that forms the major part of the diencephalon. It is a region of great functional importance and serves as cell station to all the major sensory path systems except olfactory. The thalamus is situated on each side of the third ventricle. The anterior end of the thalamus is narrow and rounded to form a posterior boundary of the interventricular foramina. The posterior end is expanded to form a pulvinar which overhangs the superior colliculus and superior brachium. The lateral geniculate body forms a small elevation on the upper aspect of the lateral portion of the pulvinar. Now if you appreciate, it's more really egg-like or ovoid shaped structure. Anteriorly, it consists of different nuclei. Posteriorly, there is actually lateral geniculate body and medial geniculate body. If you appreciate over here, this is actually showing the cavity of the third ventricle. These are the medullary bodies which are present in the midbrain, and then as it ascends on, this is actually formed with the diencephalon. This is how its slits actually divided. This is the cavity of the third ventricle, and this whole structure is like a box which is called as the diencephalon. In the middle, you have a midline nuclei. Then you have basically the thalamus around. Then this is the anterior different nuclei of the thalamus, and then on the superior and inferior different other structures. Inferior there is hypothalamus, tuber cinereum, and other structures are present. Inferiorly there is, and superiorly there are mainly fibers which are actually passing above the diencephala. Now, this diagram is actually showing the cross structure of the thalamus. As I told you, it's more like an egg-like structure or a wide shape, which contains different nuclei, and then there's two bodies which are represented at the pulvinar, which is actually mostly the posterior part of this part, which is medial geniculate body and lateral geniculate body. Now, you can appreciate there are plethora of nucleus. There's anterior different nuclei, then there's a ventral and there's a dorsal, as well as posterior and interthalamic nuclei as well, which actually connect different fibers from one part of the thalamus to the different other part of the thalamus. Then there is subthalamus. The subthalamus lies inferior to the thalamus and therefore is situated between the thalamus and tegmentum of the brain. The subthalamic nucleus has the shape of a biconvex lens. The nucleus has an important connection with the corpus striatum. As a result, it is involved in the control of a muscle activity. Other structures in the diencephalon include the epithalamus, habenular nucleus, pineal glands. The habenular nucleus is believed to be the center for integration of olfactory, visceral, and somatic afferent pathways. The pineal gland possesses no nerve cells, but adrenergic sympathetic fibers derived from superior cervical sympathetic ganglia enter the gland and run in association with the blood vessels and pinealocytes. Pineal gland is supposed to influence and not recognized as important endocrine organ which is capable of influence of activating or influencing the activity of other endocrine organs such as pituitary gland, islets of Langerhans, parathyroids, adrenal cortex, adrenal medulla, and gonads. Actually, all of them are affected by pineal gland secretions. Now, coming the other part of there's one diencephalon, the other is telencephalon. Telencephalon is mainly the cerebral hemispheres. This is the major portion which actually contains different. Then there's a cortices called as this frontal cortex. Then there's a temporal lobes, and then the parietal lobe, and then there's occipital lobe. The cerebral hemispheres are the largest part of the brain. They're separated by deep midline sagittal fissure and longitudinal cerebral fissure. Now, remember, the cortex is actually divided into depression and elevations. The depressions are called as sulci, the elevations are called as gyri. The second horizontal fold of durameter separates the cerebral hemispheres from cerebellum and is called as tentorium cerebelli. The two hemispheres are further divided by a longitudinal cerebral fissure, and then from the cerebellum via tentorium cerebelli. To increase the surface area of the cerebral cortex maximally, the surface of each cerebral hemisphere is thrown into folds which is called as gyri, which is the elevations, which is separated each other from sulci are the fissures, which is the depressions. It is customary to divide each hemisphere into lobes, which are named according to the cranial bones under which they lie. The frontal lobe is more anteriorly and it lies under with the frontal bone. Then there's towards the side there's temporal lobe, and towards superior lateral aspect we have parietal lobe, and posteriorly there is occipital lobe. Central and parietal occipital sulci and the lateral and calcarine sulci are the boundaries used for division of the cerebral hemispheres into frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital lobes. Now this is the lateral diagram of the cerebral hemispheres. As you can appreciate over here, the frontal lobe lies more towards the frontal aspect, then superior laterally there is parietal lobe, laterally there is temporal lobe, and posteriorly there is occipital lobe. This is the medial surface of the cerebellum, which is also showing the yellow part is the frontal lobe. This is the parietal lobe, this is the occipital lobe. As you cannot appreciate the temporal lobe because it lies mostly towards the lateral aspect. Then there are main sulci. What are the main sulci? The central sulcus of the great importance because the gyrus that lies anterior to it contains the motor cell that initiates the movements of the opposite side of the body. We've already discussed in the previous section what is the decussation of pyramids because precentral gyrus is the main motor cortex, and all the nerve cells present here actually the fibers which arise from this area are actually eventually decussate to the level of pyramids and control the opposite half of the body, which is called the main motor decussation, and they eventually form the lateral corticospinal tract. The lateral sulcus is deep cleft mainly on the inferior and lateral surfaces of the cerebral hemisphere. It divides into anterior horizontal ramus and descending ramus and continues as posterior ramus. I will be discussing this in the diagram. Then other includes the parieto-occipital sulcus, which begins on the superior middle margin of the hemisphere about 2 inches anterior to the occipital pole. It passes downward anterior on the middle surface to meet the calcarine sulcus. Now remember, these sulci actually divide first them into the lobe, and then every lobe into different regions which actually contain different cortices and different functions. And then these sulci actually divide them into different areas which are numbered as well, and different areas. For example, there is Broca's areas, and then there is areas for speech, and then there is comprehension, there's the areas for motor cortex, there is the area of sensory information as passes, and this is how it actually division occurs. It passes downward anterior on the middle surface to meet the calcarine sulcus, and it commences under the posterior end of the corpus callosum and arches upward and backward to reach the occipital lobe. Now, in this section, we have mainly covered what is the diencephalon, what are the structures which are formed, what are the boundaries of diencephalon, what are cerebral hemispheres, briefly discovered what the different sulci and gyra are and how they're actually dividing the brain into different regions, then first into lobes and then into different areas, and what are the nuclei of the thalamus, what are hypothalamus, and what are different functions. For further information, keep watching sqadia.com.